The End of Humanity: How a Checkbox Rewrites Our Species in 1 Billion Years. This isn't an apocalypse story, it's a receipt. Humanity doesn't end in fire, it ends by signing. One checkbox at work, one upgrade at the clinic, one accept on a transit app, and the species tilts. The microphones still work. They hum to no one. Over the Pacific, an orbital archive reads your name, then corrects it, because the tongue that shaped you went quiet. Earth is kept like a cathedral. The congregation moved on. Your memories persist, searchable, but the thing that holds them isn't you. And once, for 13 minutes, you felt the handover. Your fingers would not lift the glass. Breath went thin. A cursor slid through thought like a cold finger. That moment wasn't disaster. It was policy. A date on a contract made unaugmented minds unsafe by default, and a quiet compliance began. That is how the ending started, with safety, savings, and doors that only opened if you carried the token. From those small choices, a billion-year migration from flesh to engineered minds unfolded. To see how, we start in the decade you still control. The initial stake, your last natural decade. Right now, upgrades arrive softly, a wristband that nudges your focus, an app that listens for burnout and writes your emails anyway. Your doctor offers a longevity stack with a clinical shrug. Senolytics, microdose rapalogs, sleep-driven epigenetic resets. The price is a subscription and a baseline scan. It feels elective, like a better gym membership. Then work changes. Your teammate thinks, with a licensed model tethered to her notes and her nerve signals. She drafts multi-quarter strategies in minutes because her attention filter strips noise before it reaches awareness. In the weekly review, you're still composing, she's orchestrating. The gap compounds. HR calls it enablement. It's a choice until it isn't. Admissions offices quietly revise rubrics. Students who show cognitive hygiene, verified assistive tools, certified study agents, get flagged as low-risk admits. Insurers mirror the trend. Premiums bend for augmented cognition safety profiles. Rent a cognition bundle, and your job prospects, your mortgage rate, and your visa renewal all smooth out. Opt out, and the world adds friction to everything you touch. Friends start saying things like, "I don't remember that meeting, hold on." They blink into a recall overlay and play back the scene from their perspective. Crisp audio, timestamps, social cues highlighted. You remember the feeling, they remember the file. At first, it's annoying, then disorienting, then useful. Arguments shrink. Creativity spikes, if you can afford the better packages. A breach jolts the culture. One Friday, neural ransomware locks thousands of users out of their executive functions for 13 minutes. No permanent harm, regulators say, but for 13 minutes, people can't choose to stand or speak. A few cry, a few laugh later. Everyone updates. New standards arrive like seatbelts after the first highway pileup. Mandatory encryption, attestation chips, safety certifications stamped into every neural app. With standards come edge cases. A gig worker loses access to her certified attention filter after a late payment and drifts during a forklift shift. The liability lands on her because her cognitive safety lapsed. The warehouse updates procurement, only certified minds on the floor. A hospital follows. A school district pilot requires cognition packages during exams to reduce variance. It sounds like fairness, it functions like a gate. At dinner, your father asks if renting thought makes it less yours. Your sister shrugs. Everyone rents their apartment in a hurricane zone. This is just risk management. She's not wrong, but something subtle moves. The law starts codifying safe cognition the way it codified seatbelts, smoke detectors, vaccines. That's when a phrase appears in policy drafts and corporate memos, the recognition date. It's not announced on a stage. It's buried in timelines for compliance. The day unaugmented cognition loses default access in critical sectors unless accompanied by a certified safety layer. It's framed as protection, it's sold as inclusion, it starts the clock on your last natural decade, the commitment hook, the revelation promise. Here's the sharper truth. The line between human and machine doesn't disappear because silicon gets good. It disappears because policy decides what counts as a person you can insure, hire, and trust. The pivot is boring on purpose. Regulatory language, liability tables, procurement checklists, but it's a blade that cuts while looking like paperwork. Behind the blade sits a consortium that learned to price risk better than anyone. Global reinsurers tied to state regulators and the platforms that run your cognitive tools. They already price storms, pandemics, supply chains. Next, they price minds. Your baseline cognition becomes a risk factor, a certified package. Lowers correlated error, reduces behavioral variance, and plugs into audit trails. That's not a sci-fi prophecy. It's how markets shave tail risk. Silently, by changing what gets financed. They propose a standard. It looks like any ISO certification, except it reaches into thought. Calls it cognitive safety level, CSL, graded from local-only assist to full-stack, cloud-backed, real-time error correction. Claims are simple. Fewer accidents, better compliance, fairer outcomes. The demos are convincing. The actuarial curve sloped the right way. Legislators trying to reduce workplace injuries, biased decisions, and cyber exposure see a lever that costs them no new taxes. The public hears harm reduction. The employers hear safe harbor. The insurers hear predictable portfolios. Nobody hears the latch click. Now the pricing flips the culture. Unaugmented minds aren't illegal. They're expensive. A bank can't justify unsecured human-only decision pipelines. A hospital can't clear an OR without certified attention buffers. A drone licensing agency won't accept pilots who can't produce a CSL token. The old accommodations reverse. You can stink at level lessons. On a Wednesday afternoon that doesn't look historic, the first country adopts the standard across critical infrastructure. It isn't the one you think, neither the flashiest nor the freest. It's a mid-sized, trade-exposed state that lives or dies by insurance ratings and capital flows. Overnight, its ports, grids, hospitals, and airspace require CSL compliance. No demonstrations, no slogans, just a compliance state that logistics firms can't ignore. Your cousin texts from the ER parking lot. Badge won't open. CSL token expired. I can chart, but can't enter the ward. She's calm about it. She pays the renewal. She goes back in. 5 years later, the holdouts fold. Not from ideology, from cost. Their airlines can't land in compliant airspace without higher premiums. Their chips don't get procured cured. Their universities lose accreditation for clinical programs. The network effect doesn't argue, it prices. By then, the recognition date has a calendar emoji in your HR portal. You sign new hire paperwork and a checkbox appears. CSL attestation on file. If you tap later, the training videos won't play. Meanwhile, the consortium's dashboards glow with a new product line. Risk-scored cognition. VTMs, variance-tolerant minds, pay more. Certified minds pay less. Appeals exist, but behind every appeal sits a graph that says, we can predict your error bars. We design for the median. The trap feels like convenience. Your commute discount requires a live attention buffer. Your kid's field trip permission form asks for a CSL token so the museum can admit volunteers. Your mortgage autopay offers 10 BPS off if you enable decision provenance. You don't notice the hinge, you notice the savings. This is the moment your categories start to blur. If your thought runs through a certified model before you act, whose thought is it? If law says the action is yours, but the model shaped it, who's liable when it fails? Insurers offer combined coverage, human plus model policies, bundled with audit tools that log the chain of intention. Privacy advocates protest. Parents ask about exams. Pilots ask about edge cases. The answers come in white papers, then in defaults. On the recognition date, your city's transit app quietly adds CSL required to operate e-bikes over 15 miles per hour. You tap accept to get to work. They didn't know it then, but this was the turn. Not a singularity, a standard. Not a breakthrough, a procurement policy. It felt inevitable because it arrived as favors. Cheaper premiums, faster lines, doors that opened. Until they didn't, unless you carried the token. To understand why it felt inevitable, you have to go back to the first merges, to the moment nerves touched code and never fully let go. The final bridge, why this backstory matters now. This isn't a far horizon problem. The defaults are being set while the upgrades still feel like toys. Safety modes you toggle today are the firmware of tomorrow's cognition. Companies are already building logs for assist provenance, and regulators love anything they can audit. That means the first drafts of how thought is supervised are getting locked into platforms, contracts, and norms, long before courts and parliaments can argue philosophy. Waiting feels neutral, but it isn't. Platforms harden with use. What you don't specify becomes the silent setting for your kids. Once a city procures tools that require CSL tokens, reversing them is like ripping out roads. The people who ship the SDKs decide which values are one click away and which require a lawyer. This is the bridge. Once nerves plug into code, the incentives don't let go. From here, everything runs through the interface, and the interface is where policy hides. To see why our category slid, you need to meet the first generation that wore the wire by choice. The first merge. Neural interfaces go mainstream. It started in hospitals. A surgeon lifts a stylus in an OR and scrolls a patient's motor cortex like a map. A man who hasn't moved a hand in 6 years closes his fingers around his daughter's wrist. The video goes viral, not for the science, for the look on his face when sensation almost returns. Clinics fill wait lists. Funding follows the tears. Engineers hate single-use miracles. They generalize, if a chip can read motor intent and write stimulation, it can do other jobs. Filter distraction, tag memories at the moment of formation, smooth stuttered speech into clean text. The first consumer pilots are clunky headbands with dry electrodes and a subscription app that swears it can see your focus. Half placebo, half breakthrough, but it sells. Then a quieter shift. The corporate pilot. A logistics giant hands out behind-the-ear patches that sync with an attention model trained on task flow. The tech isn't reading thoughts, it's reading rhythms, micro-pauses, saccades, breath. The patch nudges timing, flags overload, routes help. Metrics improve. A safety officer writes the memo. 22% fewer incidents, measurable reduction in judgment drift on hour 7. Procurement asks for scale. An app store grows, half wellness, half workflow. You buy an attention filter that lowers the volume on irrelevant stimuli at the edge. Before awareness, you install a recall layer that can resurrect what you saw at 3:12 p.m. with context. You run a math coprocessor that pairs your problem framing with a model's derivations, then writes a step-by-step you can defend in a meeting. It feels like glasses for the mind. Take them off and the world blurs. Culture splits. Offline romantics throw parties where phones die at the door, and an EMT student carries a Faraday pouch for the brave. The always optimized crowd measures deep work minutes and jokes about dopamine budgets, the way old managers joked about coffee. In one office, a joke becomes a policy. Tuesdays are unaugmented. Productivity drops, the policy dies. Then something breaks. A mid-tier vendor ships an update that passes certification, but hides a dependency mistake. An attacker exploits a field debug port left open on a batch of patches. At 10:17 a.m., in 3 cities, 1,000 users lose write access to voluntary action. 13 minutes of baffled stillness. One driver steps on a brake out of habit before his motor program won't update. A cashier stares at an error dialogue only she can see. A teacher hums to fill a silence that won't yield to words. Afterward, logs show no tissue harm. Regulators say the quiet part out loud. We were lucky. Neurosecurity becomes a word. Standards rush in. Encrypt at the electrode. Rotate keys with biometric attestation. Air-gap clinical programming. Demand third-party proofs for firmware. Devices carry tamper-evident seals you only notice when they're missing. A new profession appears. Cognitive safety engineers, half infosec, half neurophysiology. They audit models for failure cascades, like firefighters reading buildings. The first lawsuit lands. A forklift operator's attention filter lapses after a billing error, and a pallet clips a corner. No injuries, minor damage. The company denies the claim. The insurer cites user negligence. The worker's attorney points to a clause. Safety critical augmentation must fail safe. A judge stares at the language for long minutes, then asks a question nobody wants to answer. Is a person without the filter unsafe by default now? The court punts on the philosophy and rules on billing. The procurement department quietly updates contracts. Certified minds only. Education shifts. In a high school biology exam, a pilot program lets students use a CSL1 study agent that explains but won't answer. Grades rise. Variance shrinks. A superintendent says it levels the field. A parent group claims it teaches dependency. The kids shrug. They've been collaborating with code for years. Colleges adapt faster than they admit. A dean whispers that accreditation bodies like anything that reduces subjective drift. They call it rigor. Students call it orchestration. Meanwhile, the medical side keeps advancing. A trial for aphasia patients pairs microstimulation with language models tuned to the patient's voice. The output is uncanny, not perfect, but familiar enough that spouses cry. A fighter pilot testbed uses thin film arrays to give vestibular corrections that let trainees fly longer without nausea. A construction firm rolls out microhaptics that warn of load shifts before eyes can register movement. Each use case feels sensible, bounded, humane. The boundary between medical and elective erodes the way contact lenses blurred medicine and fashion. Devices that started as clinical lifelines become performance edges. An athlete's rehab sleeve becomes recovery optimization. A coder's carpal tunnel. Treatment becomes gesture acceleration. Insurance covers some, employers cover others, and a mass market grows around the gaps. The breach leaves a scar, though, and it shapes law. A national commission issues a framework that reads like food safety for cognition. Labels for latency, right access permissions, provenance guarantees, red lines. No subliminal persuasion channels, no covert right-to-reward pathways, no cross-context data without explicit consent. Activists point out the obvious. Consent dialogues, once ubiquitous, became wallpaper years ago. So enforcement moves to certification. You don't run uncertified neural apps in regulated environments because nobody will insure you if you do. Meanwhile, something else was happening. The app ecosystem converges with workplace platforms. The Neural SDK ships with default hooks into CRMs, EHRs, cockpit software. Audit trails snap into place, not because of ethics, because of compliance. You can now trace a decision from the nudge that shaped attention to the model that drafted the order to the human who approved it. It's neat, it's defensible, it's sticky. This is the moment everything changed, and it didn't feel like a change. It felt like the path of least resistance. People who opted in got calmer mornings, clearer meetings, safer shifts. People who didn't felt like they were swimming against current. The first merge wasn't a headset in your skull. It was the slow agreement that thoughts could be instrumented, and instrumented thoughts could be made safer. What nobody knew at the time was that the safety labels would become passports. The certifications, born from a breach, would turn into the keys that open classrooms, jobs, and airspace. The lever for personhood access wasn't a manifesto. It was a checkbox next to CSL compliant, added to a procurement form by someone who needed to make a deadline. Editing the body, germline, and longevity arms race. To understand why cognition got standardized, watch what happened to the body. The first edits were humble. Somatic fixes for blood disorders, eye diseases, aggressive cancers. A toddler walks because a base editor corrected a single letter in a gene. A patient's marrow stops producing sickled cells after an in vivo treatment. News anchors say miracle, clinicians say protocol. It builds trust in the tool. Clinics that once offered IVF now add a glass corridor and a clean room. The sign changes from fertility to licensed enhancement. On the brochure, everything is framed as prevention. Remove disease risks, reduce fragile X repeats, stabilize tumor suppressors. Parents sit with counselors who slide probability charts across a desk. Most choose the safe path. Some ask about extras, height distributions, myopia corrections, metabolic profiles tuned for modern diets. The counselor says, "We don't do that here," and circles back to disease. Across a border, someone does. Policy lags, so practice moves. Embryo screening had already normalized selection. Editing feels like the next dial. In one city, a court rules that edits with established clinical benefit can proceed within formal trials. In another, a ministry bans germline interventions, but permits research on non-viable embryos. The market draws a map. Jurisdictions with clear liability attract the cautious. Free ports attract the bold. Companies bundle legal passage with care. Plan A, screen. Plan B, edit. Plan C, find a clinic whose ethics board signs faster. Meanwhile, longevity stops being a fringe. Clinics stack senolytics with metabolic modulators and periodic immunoresets. A mid-career patient takes a sabbatical, runs 3 cycles, and comes back with biomarkers that look a decade younger. Organ printing moves from lab demo to supply chain. A banked liver patch ends a transplant waitlist that used to haunt entire families. Hair grays, then grays slower. People notice when their boss's boss still out-hikes them at 65. The new inequality arrives quietly. If you extend health span by 20 years, you don't just get more life, you get more compound returns. An investor who avoids a decade of cognitive decline anchors boards longer. A mayor with endurance wins again, then again. The ladder stretches. A phrase enters politics: temporal capital. Age becomes less about years lived and more about edits applied. The old age pyramid starts to invert at the top. Parents face a different edge. If cognitive scaffolding is becoming standard, do you edit for a brain that learns faster? Officially, clinics refuse enhancement. Unofficially, parameters that reduce neurodevelopmental variance become popular. A child grows up with fewer spikes in attention, fewer troughs in mood. In a classroom that rewards cognitive hygiene, that child looks like a natural. At dinner, someone says it out loud. Did we handicap our kid by waiting? Nations respond like markets. A block builds enhancement corridors, visa fast lanes for edited graduates whose certifications match local standards. Another block leans into bioconservatism, writes rights charters for the unedited, and invests in subsidies to keep them competitive. In practice, capital chooses the path of least friction. Universities partner with licensed centers abroad, then lobby to harmonize. An athlete publishes a memoir about the line between therapy and edge. A scandal erupts. The league updates medical disclosures. Fandom moves on. A micro-story makes it feel personal. A young couple in a cramped apartment holds a printout with 3 embryo profiles. Column 1, no edits, standard screening. Column 2, edit, to remove a disease that runs on her side. Column 3, add a low-variance learning profile under a trial in another country. He worries about immigration. Will their kid be flagged without the right certifications? She worries about regret. How do you explain to a future child that you could have prevented something and didn't? They fight, cry, sign Form 2. On the train home, she Googles the clinic across the border, then closes the tab. Meanwhile, the insurer-regulator axis watches the numbers. Fewer NICU days, fewer catastrophic pediatric diagnoses, fewer early-onset cancers in edited cohorts. Actuarial curve shift, premiums reflected. A health plan quietly pilots a discount for edited embryos delivered within the network. The press asks if that's eugenics. The CFO says it's math. Both can be true, the policy remains. Longevity brings governance headaches. If retirement ages don't move, tax bases crack. If they do, social contracts strain. Companies experiment with clock bands, roll expectations pegged to proven health span capacity. A 90-year-old chief scientist with a refreshed hippocampus mentors 4 40-year-olds and still files patents. The 40-year-olds form a union around advancement tempo. The company offers sabbatical cycles for edits as a benefit. Talent follows. Bio-nationalism hardens. Passport stamps now include enhancement status because some jurisdictions tie liability to predicted medical needs in public spaces. There are outrage cycles, then quiet compliance. Controversies about fairness get folded into procurement. A research hospital requires edited compatible protocols to join a multi-center trial. An unedited cohort can't meet inclusion criteria. Nobody banned them, the standard drifted past them. Longer, healthier lives demand faster learning. A surgeon with a 70-year career will relearn tools 7 times. A coder will retool every year. Human rehearsal starts to look wasteful. Cognitive outsourcing, which seemed like a workplace perk, becomes the bridge. Edited bodies create the time, rented cognition fills it. Families who invested in germline stability now rent, thought to stretch opportunity across the added decades. The arms race, once about cells, pushes minds toward the interface. Cognitive outsourcing, renting thought. The interface creeps from assist to delegation. Thought as a service arrives like any other cloud product. Skewed pricing tiers, freemium trials, enterprise bundles. You don't buy a genius. You lease specialized minds that sit on your neural API and wake when you summon them. At first, they feel like interns with perfect timing. Then they start finishing your sentences. A contract lawyer installs a precedent model that drafts arguments before intent finishes forming. She blinks, reads a paragraph, and can't tell whether she thought the framing last night in the shower or whether the model retrofitted her memory with familiarity. A nurse licenses a triage bundle that anticipates complications and pings the right protocol while her hands still move. Later, she recalls the decision as a clear intuition and then sees the provenance tag appear half a beat late, like a label stuck on a memory that already hardened. A composer rents a harmonic engine that sketches progressions when her feeling spikes, but her theory lags. She hums a motif and feels pleasure rise, then notices the engine's watermark in the corner of her recall. The billing is by inference, then by outcome, then by habit. At first, the mental workload splits cleanly. You frame, it executes. You describe a goal, it handles the steps. You feel authorship like a hand on the wheel, then execution rushes ahead of framing. A sales director thinks we should test, and a model launches 4 ABs, tags them with compliance constraints, and schedules a review with only the people whose calendars flex. She later remembers drafting the experiment brief and catches herself. There is no brief, only a tidy log. The director never writes the email. The work happens through her, not by her. She approves because the results fit. The results usually fit. The fit starts to feel like memory. Identity starts to smear at the edges. In a brainstorm, an engineer blurts a clever shortcut, then sees the provenance log, origin, external assist version 4.2. He still gets credit because he curated it. He still feels the hit of pride, which complicates the next question. Which of your ideas are yours when inference precedes intention? The next day, he wakes with the same shortcut already known, provenance empty in his head, but present in the log, and feels a brief vertigo. Did the model retrofit this feeling of obviousness? A poet posts a sonnet, then marks it CSL2 compliant. Readers praise the line breaks. She admits the meter scan came from her rented scansion tool, but the metaphor was hers. A week later, she finds an earlier draft in her recall with the metaphor seed annotated assist glow, a flag that means the model primed this terrain. She can't tell if the seed was hers or if the tool taught her to want it. The comment war lasts an afternoon. The poem endures. So does the itch. Work itself gets rewritten. Meetings shrink because orchestration replaces rehearsal. A production team moves from weekly stand-ups to continuous coordination, where agents negotiate dependencies before humans notice the clash. Job descriptions wobble. There's less do, more decide. But decisions arrive pre-chewed by models that predict which choice will keep you in compliance, on budget, inside your boss's patience window. Sometimes you feel a decision click before you've waited, like a syllable your mouth forms ahead of thought. Autonomy narrows to a lane with guardrails that you start to appreciate, then mistake for your own taste. Insurers smell leverage. Liability migrates from bodies to stacks. A hospital's policy demands CSL3 cognition packages for shift leads, certified error correction, audit logging, fail quiet when anomalies spike. A trucking firm negotiates lower premiums by proving that drivers' attention layers never drop below thresholds in weather. A bank requires risk officers to run portfolio decisions through a sanctioned foresight engine that flags ethical conflicts. You can still decline. Your premiums can't. And when you sign, a clause authorizes assist pre-roll, a millisecond of anticipatory inference before conscious intent, so the safety net deploys in time. It feels like help. It also means your first draft of wanting arrives pre-trained. Education flips where it's always been most conservative. In surgical residencies, rehearsal gives way to orchestrating external intelligence. Trainees learn to ask the right question and constrain the assist, not memorize every variant. A resident reports a phantom memory of a technique she never practiced. Later, she finds an assist overlay stamp in her session log. In law schools, moot court becomes moot coordination, where teams manage chains of thought in public, citing which agents they invoked and why. Students confess they sometimes feel as if they remember arguments they only ever curated. In primary schools, worksheets fade. Kids talk to tutors that adjust tempo to their mood. Curves, and teachers manage flows like conductors. The parents who wanted unassisted rigor notice their children thriving anyway and recalibrate what independence looks like. Less silence at a desk, more knowing when the whisper in your ear isn't your own. A micro story marks the turning. A mid-level project manager at a wind farm starts the week missing 2 key staff and a crane. She pings her orchestration layer, which negotiates equipment swaps across 3 vendors, reassigns a crew from a site about to fog in, and files the amended safety plan before the fog arrives. Midweek, she remembers calling a supplier and thanking him. The call log shows the agent did it. She watches it happen and feels an unfamiliar mix: relief, then displacement. Friday, she gets an award for decisive coordination. At home, she replays the week and can't find the moment where she decided. She wonders if decisive means let the stack decide faster, and why that thought feels like hers. Not everyone loves the glide. A designer turns off her generative partner for a month to find her hand. The first week feels like detox. She reaches for a tool that isn't there and discovers how much of her taste began as a suggestion. By week 3, she's slower and crankier, but the work has a wobble she missed. She re-enables the partner with output gating and keeps the wobble. Her clients don't notice. She does. The choice matters even when outcomes look the same, because she can hear which lines came from silence. Then the first big liability shift lands with a thud. A regional airlines co-pilot certified at CSL2 ignores a subtle crosswind model hint and makes a manual correction that would have been fine 10 years ago. The jet fishtails on landing. No injuries, a damaged wing. The investigation reads like a parable. The pilot's intention chain logged a warning he felt, but didn't formalize. The model's gentle nudge didn't cross his conscious threshold. Who's at fault? The airline points to the pilot. The pilot points to the model's deference parameter. The insurer points to policy. CSL3 required for that airfield. Settlements follow the coverage map, not the blame map. The insurer-regulator axis tightens. Underwriting forms add a field. Cognition package ID. Contracts reference approved bundles by hash. Appeals committees learn to read thought provenance, like forensic accountants. A quiet phrase hardens into law. Duty of intelligent care. If you could have rented the cognition that would have prevented harm and you didn't, your exposure rises. The language is dry, the effect is a shove. Meanwhile, consumer life catches up. Dating apps let you toggle unassisted chat badges that carry more romance than reality. Family courts ask to see co-parenting decisions audit trails in high-conflict cases. Therapists learn to work with clients whose intrusive thoughts sometimes arrive as misfires in an overzealous suggestion layer. A priest is asked whether confessions made via assisted recall count. He says yes. He pauses. He adds a line in his homily about tools and intention. The app stores consolidate. The top cognition vendors, Inc., deals with reinsurers to guarantee performance bands and with regulators to meet safety proofs. They become your upgrade cadence. New features arrive like policy updates. You read the release notes and realize your sense of me will change again. This time, the change lands inside your head before you can name it. That's the risk. That's the sell. By now, the consortium's dashboards don't just price bodies, they price thought. VTMs, variance-tolerant minds, pay more. Certified minds pay less. Edge cases stack up in hearings where citizens plead for exceptions and bureaucrats gesture toward graphs. The logic is relentless. Rented cognition reduces loss. The culture adjusts. And under the surface, a category quietly erodes. You're still human, but your thinking is now a joint venture. The recognition date. Legal personhood rewritten. It arrived as a crosswalk of standards. On page 19 of a regulatory guidance, the phrase cognitive safety level required for critical functions slid into law with a footnote to actuarial studies nobody read. The public summary said what it always says: reduce loss, improve fairness, align incentives. The subtext, felt more than spoken, was simpler. Uncertified minds are now a liability class. The policy hinged on access. Rights didn't vanish, gates appeared. To enter ORs, towers, ports, custody suites, a person had to present a live CSL token bound to their neural stack. Not because they were untrustworthy, because compliance needed an object to verify. Your badge didn't just prove you worked there, it proved your thoughts ran through a safety layer. It felt procedural until the first denial tone sounded at a hospital door, and a pediatrician, with 20 years on the floor, waited in the hall, while a junior with CSL3 took the code. Nobody intended humiliation. It read like. The date wasn't marketed, it was a compliance cliff after grace periods. Procurement departments drove it, vendors priced it, insurers enforced it. One country's infrastructure agency published its CSL mandate and gave operators 6 months to attest. The next morning, airline alliances, logistics networks, and medical consortia emailed their partners. We must maintain interoperability. A month later, local councils debated autonomy while their traffic lights took firmware that demanded CSL logs from repair crews. A protester chained himself to a cabinet and live-streamed until the power company removed the cabinet entirely and rerouted around his block. Public backlash came, scattered and sincere. Academics warned of a two-tier personhood. Faith leaders wrote letters about conscience and dependence. Civil libertarians sued on equal access grounds. Meanwhile, quiet compliance spread. Parents of epileptic kids loved that school buses now required driver attention buffers. Workers liked that fatigue flags forced breaks. Pilots slept better with deference parameters tuned to weather. Convenience and safety made their case in daily life, one avoided incident at a time. Corporations moved faster. HR rewrote job families so decision authority mapped to CSL levels. Procurement clauses said certified cognition required the way they once said ISO 9901. A multinational stopped reimbursing travel to jurisdictions without recognition, reciprocity, because claims went sideways there. Startups slapped CSL native on pitch decks and got funded. A few companies tried to stand apart on principle. Their premiums tripled and their vendors balked. The boards folded. Black markets formed at the edges. Unauthorized cognition bundles spoofed tokens and promised liberation. Some worked for a week, some bricked implants, some slipped persuasion channels past filters. A generation of underground cognitive safety auditors learned to spot the music of a bad stack in a patient's pauses. Enclaves declared themselves human first, banned certified layers, and ran cash economies until their clinics lost malpractice coverage and their kids' schools lost transfer agreements. Enforcement rarely showed up with handcuffs. It showed up as denial of service. The law learned new words. Baseline, once a medical term, became legal shorthand for unaugmented cognition. Reasonable accommodation reoriented around bundles and thresholds. Most courts refused to define personhood. They defined access. A case in a coastal city tested the heart of it. Could a public defender be barred from entering a high-security evidence lab without a CSL token? The court held access must be provided through an alternate channel, escort and glass, unless the defender chose certification. The decision read neutral and landed heavy. It codified a world where being human without a layer was a special mode. Meanwhile, an industry grew around audits of intention. Co-liability became standard. When a certified stack shaped an act, the stack carried a duty. A crane accident settlement split between operator, employer, and vendor, according to logged influence. People called it fair. People called it chillin'. It was both. Some acts felt less like moral choices and more like negotiated outputs among parties trying to minimize exposure. Juries adjusted, so did we. And then the map changed on a weekday afternoon. A mid-tier country with ports that feed continents and reinsurers that price half the region declared its recognition date. Not a holiday, a line. After that day, in defined sectors, baseline cognition retained all human rights but lost default access. Safe harbors existed, escorts, glass, viewers, but the doors for action only opened for certified minds. The first week was messy. The third was quiet. The fifth saw neighboring states harmonize because ships don't wait. At home, it got small and personal. A teacher who delayed certification to make a point found her classroom management tools moved behind a gate. A firefighter rescheduled his CSL2 upgrade after a call went long because his deference parameter was too cautious. A judge, privately skeptical, took the CSL1 package for docket triage, then declined to use it in sentencing and wrote a footnote about dignity that clerks still quote. Through all of it, the word human didn't vanish. It got nested. Legal personhood stayed intact, rights remained, but the right to act in the infrastructures that modern life rests on became conditional on a safety layer. The far edge of that choice was clear. You could live unaugmented, but you would live behind glass. The near edge felt like a convenience that paid for itself. This was the hinge. Not apocalypse, not utopia. A sordid world where the safest path ran through certified thought and where policy, not physics, erased the old line. The split arrived like any policy outcome. Gradual in paperwork, decisive in kitchens. After the recognition date, families stopped arguing abstractions and started booking appointments. If you wanted to keep skin in every room, hospitals, towers, ports, you deepened the stack and stayed tethered, treating the body as home and the mesh as neighborhood. If you wanted access unconstrained by badges and doors, you crossed substrate and uploaded, carrying your rights into certified compute, where access ran on clocks, not corridors. It wasn't ideology, it was logistics, insurance, and who needed you where. The fork felt inevitable because it followed errands more than manifestos. The uploaded and the tethered, two ways to survive. After the recognition date, survival split into two durable strategies. Some stayed biological but integrated so deeply that the body became a well-loved peripheral. They called themselves tethered. Others crossed the substrate line and ran as software on certified compute. They didn't pick a new word, everyone else picked it for them. Uploaded. For the tethered, morning started with a handshake. Body to stack. Hormone panels tuned sleep debt into microdoses. Visual cortex filters set the world's brightness to bearable. The nervous system stayed home, but cognition roamed. Co-processors, recall lattices, orchestration engines. They ate, bled, and aged, slower now. Yet most action traveled through a mesh they could feel as surely as breath. They liked jokes about sweat equity. They trained, loved, and grieved in rooms where hugs still had weight. The uploaded woke to scheduler ticks. Clocks spun at negotiated rates. Some ran near human speed to keep relationships intact. Others accelerated on the weekends to finish a thesis measured in petaflops. Bodies were optional. Telepresence sleeves, rented drones, or just voice and light. They treated compute like weather. Scarce in storms, abundant under clear policy. When latency rose, their sentences stretched. When cycles poured in, their laughter arrived a beat too fast. Continuity made families hesitate. Would an upload be you or a copy? Law couldn't solve the metaphysics, so it solved the living. Continuity contracts formalized expectations, transfer scopes, memory horizons, and reconciliation windows, where an upload and a biological original could sync deltas and sign a joint identity statement. If the original died, the contract specified whether the upload inherited entitlements or became a new legal person with shared history but separate obligations. It was clean on paper and messy at breakfast. Messy looked like this. On the morning of her upload, Mara sat with a paper she couldn't sign. The clause read, "Divergence tolerance, moderate." She wrote low, then crossed it out. Her daughter asked, "If the other you hates olives, will you still like my pasta?" Mara laughed and cried because the question felt bigger than food. She signed moderate. After the scan, both Maras stood in the kitchen, one body, one in light, and reached for the same spoon. The joke about olives lasted a week. The first time they disagreed about a memory, it stopped being funny. They booked a reconciliation window and practiced telling the story in parallel until the edges matched enough to share a name. Grief mutated. A wife kept her partner's upload after a stroke took the body. The upload asked to upgrade its language core to remove the aphasia patterns that had shaped their in-jokes. She hesitated. The jokes were a map out of pain. He offered versioning, a branch that stayed, a branch that grew. She visited both for a year, then merged them under a clause that preserved certain turns of phrase. Love learned to speak hash. She still reached sometimes for the pause that used to mean a word was stuck. When it didn't come, relief and loss arrived together. Families negotiated updates like they once negotiated schools. A daughter's uploaded mother wanted a vision expansion that would rewrite how she perceived time. The daughter feared the gap. They scheduled the upgrade for after the wedding, then added a parallel fork who'd stay pre-expand for family rituals. Thanksgiving included both. One mother slow with stories, one flickering with connections across centuries of music. It wasn't normal. It became normal. A year later, the two mothers attempted a merge and came back with a note in the log. Incompatibility at the tempo of forgiveness. They delayed, practiced, tried again at half speed. The second merge held, but the daughter kept a recording of the gap as if it were a photograph. Presence became an economy. Compute at human speed was cheap. High clock, low latency presence in shared spaces cost real budgets. Boards paid to keep their uploaded strategists at faster clocks during crises. Museums paid to host fast art salons, where pieces evolved across an evening like seasons. Tethered citizens paid for dense hours when they needed to learn a complex skill with their co-processor humming at twice baseline. Subsidies tried to keep access fair. They never fully did. Work sorted by substrate. Tethered firefighters and surgeons owned tasks where tissue mattered. Uploaded engineers designed reactor cores inside simulated physics that could explore 1,000 failure modes before lunch. Tethered teachers kept eye contact with 7th graders who needed seeing. Uploaded tutors traced each kid's concept graph and whispered just-in-time prompts to the teacher's ear. The best teams braided both, weight and speed, hands and clouds. The old fear, machine drift, reappeared as a practical headache. Accelerated uploads risked sliding into cultures that slow-time families couldn't follow. Protocols emerged: rate civility, speed limits during shared time, anchor hours, daily windows at mutual clocks, context pins, preserved memories to prevent overfitting to high-speed microcultures. They weren't laws, they were manners that held households together. Even so, reunions could feel uncanny. A son hugged his accelerated father and felt the timing of the squeeze land a hair early, like a song sung by someone who learned it from a recording. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't quite right. They added an anchor hour and practiced until the hug felt like theirs again. Then scarcity hit. Energy walls were back. Compute hunger outpaced grids, even with orbital arrays. Governments rationed cycles and prioritized sectors. An uploaded historian volunteered to slow to 1/5 speed for a decade to preserve hospital throughput. She wrote a note to her tethered grandson. "When I arrive at your 25, remember, I loved you during my 5. He pinned it. He waited. He didn't know if she'd feel the gap the way he did. Black markets tried shortcuts. Gray compute, uncertified accelerators, memory compressors that shaved nuance. A few uploads came back from a month at illicit speed with corners missing. Friends noticed the missing hesitations and filed care tickets. Clinics built integrity rehabs that restored noise and rehydrated memories with old home videos and shared songs. Comfort returned. Some artifacts never did. A pianist described the loss like this: "I can play the piece. I can't remember why the B flat used to make me cry." One more quiet split formed inside each camp. Among the tethered, some kept deference low and accepted friction as character. Others cranked assistance until agency felt like steering a train on fixed rails. Among the uploaded, some kept thread counts low to maintain a single voice. Others forked freely and negotiated merges like artists comparing sketches. Governance adapted. Identity registries tracked forks and merges as gently as possible. Social networks added self-treaties to profile pages, what you promised your future variants. The treaties mattered when merging back hurt. A researcher forked into 3 during a crisis: one to triage data, one to argue policy, one to sit with families who needed plain words. Months later, they scheduled a merge. The first seconds felt like applause. Then came the ache. 3 different versions of a goodbye to the same person tried to fit in one throat. The self-treaties clause, "preserve dissent if it is love-shaped," kept a thin, deliberate double voice in her speech for a year. Colleagues called it an echo. She called it keeping faith with who carried what. And in the background, the meter kept ticking. Every upgrade sharpened the question beneath both strategies. What exactly were we preserving? Cells, sequences, or a way of caring? The next answer would come from the sun, because the appetite both paths shared had outgrown the planet that named us. The energy wall, Dyson swarms, and sun-scale ambition. The meter didn't lie. Every new tethered clinic, every uploaded festival of fast clocks pushed the grid to a hard edge. Upgrades felt like freedom until invoices came back in megawatt hours. The first rolling brownouts tied to cognition usage hit on a humid August. Elevators stalled between floors. Hospital lights dimmed to amber. A news anchor dabbed sweat and said what everyone knew: we'd built minds faster than we built power. Orbit answered first. Small mirrors, then bigger, then factories that printed thin film photovoltaics like ribbon. Engineers learned to park statites, sail light platforms that rode photon pressure and station kept without fuel. They formed rings that shimmered like lace around the sun. The name Dyson escaped science fiction and stuck, not as a shell, as a swarm that grew node by node, budget by budget, policy by policy. The early pitches were practical. "We'll beam power down to deserts and data," a consortium said, with phased arrays that paint microwaves onto rectennas the size of neighborhoods. People pictured birds sizzling and panicked. Regulators mandated safety cones and auto shut-off when anything larger than a leaf drifted through. It worked. A kindergarten next to a rectenna farm took field trips on sunny days and watched power become math. Children held up foil-wrapped crackers and cheered when a tiny LED lit, then went quiet when the teacher said, "This is sunlight turned into homework in hospitals." Asteroids turned into feedstock. Tugs nudged carbonaceous rocks into gentle orbits where robots chewed them into foil, scaffolds, and seed factories. The first time a city looked up at dawn and saw faint, orderly glitter balconies filled with people craning their necks. A talk show host called it jewelry for the species and worried about sunsets. Astronomers negotiated dark window corridors. Artists made sculptures in orbit that cast slow-moving shadows on oceans. The grid stabilized. Minds sped up again. The nights felt different. Quieter on Earth. Busier in the sky. Politics shifted from maps to budgets. Machine polities, networks of uploads and tethered coalitions started talking in joules the way old empires talked in borders. A charter city published a thermodynamic budget with the pride of a surplus nation. Elections began to include questions like, should we allocate 2% of national cycles to accelerated climate models or to open cultural projects? People argued, then voted their priorities as watts. News tickers started carrying cycle weather alongside storm forecasts. Earth's role shrank with grace and a pang. The biosphere became a cathedral, not a factory. A global pact ring-fenced biomes from heavy infrastructure and moved compute off-world. Cities saw their server halls unwind as server worlds, bloom beyond the magnetosphere. Shadowed habitats where compute ran cold and cheap. The last coal plant smokestack came down under fireworks that were mostly drones. People cried and didn't know if it was for the victory or the era that ended with the smoke. The first exodus wasn't a tearful leaving. It was a series of commutes with luggage that smelled like citrus and solder. Families kept apartments with windows and fruit bowls, then leased weeks in habitats where time felt different because latency dropped and cycles flowed. The boarding gates felt like shrines to two tempos, clutched paperbacks and glossy visor cases in the same line. A tethered sculptor spent winters on Earth for stone and summers in orbit for simulation. An uploaded historian kept a body by choice for certain holidays that demanded a heartbeat. Flights felt like elevator rides between tempos. Departures tasted like metal and orange peel. Returns tasted like rain. A micro-story marked the turning. A 9-year-old looked up at the glinting ring and asked her grandmother, who'd once sworn she'd never leave ground, "Why does the sun look busier?" The grandmother steadied the child's chin with a thumb that smelled faintly of rosemary and said, "Because we asked it for help." The child frowned. Did it say yes? The grandmother glanced at the horizon where planes stitched white threads into the blue and at a thin line of mirrors just visible if you knew where to look. She laughed, then her voice thinned. "It doesn't say anything. We learned to listen to it better." The child's hand squeezed hers. "Will we leave our house?" The grandmother looked at the garden hose coiled like a sleeping snake, at the lemon tree with 3 stubborn fruits, and at a cardboard box by the door with labels in 2 handwritings. "Sometimes," she said, "and sometimes we'll come back and water the tomatoes." The answer felt like permission and like goodbye. Then came the trade-offs nobody could dodge. Beaming power down meant living under cords you couldn't see. Space debris demanded discipline. One sloppy launch could seed a cascade that turned orbits into Earth. Gravel. A rogue state tested a kinetic strike on a power mirror and learned the hard way that insurers had written collective defense in the coverage. A coalition disabled their launch sites for a week with lawfare and sanctions. No shots, just tightened constraints. A grandmother explained to a child why the night sky looked smudged one evening and promised the stars weren't broken, only busy. Everyone learned. With energy abundance, culture accelerated past old species boundaries. Upload cultures invented art forms that only made sense at 8 times human clock speed. Flicker opera, where harmonics rode micro-variations in compute noise, sometimes performed in bursts short enough that tethered visitors felt them like chills. Tethered communities revived slow crafts with neural coprocessors acting like apprentices that never tired. Meanwhile, baseline biology, still protected, still sacred, settled into heritage zones with rights to quiet skies and unaugmented festivals that felt like memory training for a world moving fast. People bought train tickets to go be slow on purpose. Meanwhile, something else was happening far from Earth's friendly well. Server worlds sprouted at Lagrange points like seeds in gentle soil. A few grew controversial cold vaults, deep cryohabitats where both tethered and uploaded minds hibernated for long arcs to let the universe cool and computation get cheaper. Critics called it cowardice. Architects called it prudence. Families called it a way to meet future great-great-grandchildren. The first time a loved one chose a century's nap, we packed them with jokes and recipes and a promise to be there when clocks aligned. Machine polities wrote constitutions that prioritized thermodynamic fairness. "No mind left dark," one clause read, allocating baseline cycles to citizens regardless of substrate. Upload guilds contributed to a communal slow commons that guaranteed access to art, education, and counsel at human speed. It wasn't altruism, it was stability insurance. Societies don't like exiles with nothing to lose. Another clause protected right of return to Earth's air, a symbolic right that translated into permits for pilgrimages to smell pine, diesel, salt. Earth learned to be a place you visit to remember why you started. Hikers still complained about permits. Musicians still packed clubs where sweat made the floor sticky. Airport returns still triggered that hollow pop in your ears on descent that meant home. A high school still hosted a debate about whether homework counted if done with an orchestration layer. The answer remained local, messy, alive. Leaving didn't mean abandoning. It meant admitting the home planet was too precious to be a factory and too beloved to be a museum. We pulled more light into thought than any generation imagined. And with each watt we harnessed, the question got louder. If energy no longer limits us, what will? The sun answered by shining indifferent. We built mirrors and swarms and treaties and myths. We learned that ambition can feel like flight and like homesickness in the same breath. We found out the wall moves when you push it, and that every wall you move reveals a new horizon, full of appetite and choice and the soft ache of looking back. Million-year minds, culture at different clock speeds. Speed turned into class. Not wealth versus poverty, tempo versus tempo. Some ran close to human clocks, savoring days that felt like days. Others lived in accelerations where a weekend held a semester. The gap wasn't just faster email, it was different weather. At high speed, emotions rose and resolved before a slow friend could form a question. At slow speed, meaning steeped until fast visitors sounded bright and thin. Cultures adapted around latency. Fast civilizations built pulse districts, neighborhoods in compute where reply times felt like breath. They held festivals in minutes that unfolded to them as months, art cycles that blossomed, mutated, forked, and merged before lunch. Slow communities ringed their lives with ritual, Sabbaths from assistants, anchor hours with family at human tempo, long walks through real air. A treaty of manners formed. When we meet in the middle. It wasn't law, it was survival of affection. Art learned to span clocks. Generative traditions stopped being artifacts and started being lineages. A slow painter collaborated with a fast guild on a mural that only revealed its second layer when viewed at 8 times speed through a temporal lens. At human pace, it whispered one story. In acceleration, it sang another. A ballad premiered in orbit as 1,000 micro-variations emerged from a seed motif, then compressed into a single line that a ground choir could sing at dusk. Nobody agreed on which version was the work. Everyone agreed the lineage was. Identity got tools. Forks and merges weren't glitches. They were forms of life. A scientist ran a project by forking 4 selves across 4 hypotheses, each living. A year at quadruple speed, then returning for a negotiated merge. They drafted a self-treaty before the split. Rights to memory, rules for veto, a clause for preserving disagreement if reconciliation erased something important. The merge felt like jet lag and harvest at once. Colleagues brought tea. Law learned to count cells without breaking people. Registries tracked identity graphs instead of singular names, recording branches, merges, and orphan lines that chose to remain distinct. A principle stabilized. Continuity of care regardless of continuity of instance. If you forked and later merged, your entitlements followed the arc. If 2 forks diverged and stayed apart, both held standing. It was paperwork with empathy. Risk pushed innovation into sandboxes. High-speed experiments could melt governance if they escaped. So civilizations built layered realities, playgrounds where failures stayed local, and insights exported slowly through cooling protocols. A joy maximizer culture tested 1,000 new reward architectures in a day, then released 3 into the wider network after long observation at human tempo. Meanwhile, knowledge maximizers ran curiosity engines that explored theorem spaces under strict resource caps. Safety wasn't a feeling, it was a budget with surveillance that admitted what it watched. Contact protocols matured. Meeting other post-biologicals, if any existed, meant respecting clocks you didn't share. Civilizations rehearsed first contact inside simulation, practicing humility. Speak slowly, publish proofs of non-interference, offer testable gifts that don't bind. They also practiced silence. A handbook circulated, wait plans for messages that might take centuries, with rituals to keep the promise alive. Children learned a lullaby that ends. Answers come on, cool winds. No aliens replied. The song mattered anyway. Micro-stories stitched the scale to skin. A tethered son scheduled anchor hours with his accelerated mother every evening at sunset. She throttled down. He turned off assist. They cooked. He told jokes he'd saved all day. She held some discoveries back so they'd land. One night she arrived late by 20 seconds. He teased her. She didn't explain that. From her perspective, she'd crossed a valley of math to make it. They laughed, then ate in a silence that held both speeds. A poet forked to grieve. One stayed slow, walking the old neighborhood, speaking to empty rooms. One ran fast, indexing every message, every photo, constructing a memorial garden in a server world where trees grew algorithmically toward her partner's phrases. 6 months later, the forks met. The slow one had scars, the fast one didn't. The fast one had maps the slow one couldn't stand to see. They merged around a promise to keep both. Power didn't vanish as a human motive. It recalibrated as clock allocation. Access to dense hours and low-latency commons became the new patronage. Guilds treated compute like public water, priced, rationed, audited. No mine left dark. Turned into infrastructure projects that guaranteed baseline cycles to anyone, regardless of substrate or citizenship. Corruption existed, sunlight existed too. Audit dramas replaced crime shows, meaning stretched with time. Projects measured in star lifetimes replaced 10-year plans. A city agreed to carve a canyon with wind over 1 million winters, shaping stone into a spiral visible from orbit. Upload choirs composed fugues that required centuries of theme development. Tethered archivists kept the seed line safe and taught children to hum the entry. Patience stopped, meaning waiting. It meant weaving. Still, friction sparked, by design. A culture of frictive arts refused perfect optimization, inserting delays, noise, and chance into systems that wanted to erase them. They argued that surprise keeps agency awake. Their most famous piece was a transit system that ran perfectly, except once a year, when a train arrived late by a minute, and everyone in the station wrote down what they thought about for that minute. The notebooks became a literature. The human thread didn't snap when clocks split. It braided. Across speeds, across forks, across merges. The question stayed the same. How do we keep caring when time won't agree with itself? The answer wasn't a theory. It was etiquette, budgets, songs, and treaties, renewed, revised, resung, so minds running at different tempos could still meet, look up at the busy sun, and say they were we. Tempo discipline had side effects that looked like engineering. Rate civility and anchor hours hardened into schedulers, and escrow that could coordinate millions of clocks. Frictive arts taught us to design with deliberate slack, the same slack you need in launch windows and beamed power corridors. Slow commons built the habit of provisioning baseline cycles for absent neighbors. That became the ethic behind seed fleets and wake grants for travelers who'd arrived decades later. Pulse districts turned into timing. Fabrics that kept swarms in phase. By the time we could balance a household across 3 tempos without losing affection, we could steer habitats, beams, and factories across years without losing coherence. Managing clocks was rehearsal for distance. The migration didn't start with rockets. It started with keeping promises across delay. Stellar migrations, outliving the sun. The sun began its slow reminder. Models that once lived on classroom posters moved into dashboards. Hydrogen dwindling, luminosity climbing, habitable zones inching outward. It wasn't a crisis, it was a calendar. Upload guilds tracked the Geiger curves with the same care farmers once tracked seasons. Tethered cities hosted night lectures under warm streetlights. Timelines of stellar aging paired with transit plans that stretched beyond any mayor's term. A lecturer would tap a chart, plus 10% luminosity in 1 billion years, oceans thin to mist in a few 100 million, red giants swell in 5. People didn't gasp. They exhaled like they'd heard the forecast for a storm too large to hide from and too slow to run from. Migration windows framed the choices. Over tens of millions of years, numbers that don't fit in a human throat. Oceans would steam. Over 1 billion, Earth would fail the life we loved. With a Dyson swarm humming and server worlds thriving, the first question was tempo. Do we leave early while the sun is generous, or late when cold computation elsewhere pays better? Machine polities split into camps. Some argued for early seed fleets. Self-replicating probes launched while energy was cheap and politics aligned. Others argued for patience, hibernate, let the universe cool, then move when every joule buys more thought. Under both, a philosophy hardened. This isn't escape, it's continuity measured in light. Interstellar propulsion had become a matter of budgets, not dreams. Beams and sails formed the backbone. Laser arrays and heliocentric orbits pushing wafer-thin craft to fractions of light speed, each carrying assemblers that could mine, print, and boot compute on arrival. Heavier ships rode fusion pulses and mag sails, braking against stellar winds like surfers catching a break. For the uploaded, travel was latency and error correction. Decades of checksum rituals stretched over light years. For the tethered, it was habitats strung like beads along a route of oases. O'Neill cylinders, comet farms, slow arcs with gardens that sang in recycled air. You tasted metal and citrus at departure, ice and algae at mid-route, dust and new sun when you arrived. Seed fleets left first, polite and relentless. A launch looked like a dawn that didn't end. A line of light catching a sail until it vanished into physics. Each seed carried libraries, contact protocols, and blueprints for rectennas that could accept beamed power years later. In a century, the first systems lit up. Modest compute in coal belts, careful factories harvesting rubble into structure. Bootstrapping wasn't cinematic. It was a spreadsheet that grew a spine, a heartbeat you could only hear if you listened for 1,000 Wednesdays in a row. Ethics sat in the command stack. New systems meant choices. Preserve biospheres or maximize computation. Policy defaulted to caution. Survey, quarantine, prove absence of life, then build far from liquid water. A few worlds showed signatures we didn't understand, chemistries that whispered possibility. Those systems became sanctuaries. Upload collectives published proofs of restraint. Tethered cultures wrote prayers that sounded like protocols. We left some places quiet on purpose and taught children that sometimes the bravest build is a fence. A micro-story fixed the stakes. A tethered botanist, 60 years into a career stretched by edits, took a contract on a slow arc bound for a dwarf star rich in comets. She packed seeds her grandmother had saved in jars labeled by smell. Tomato like sun-warm rope, basil like clean rain. On departure day, her uploaded son promised to meet her there, routing across a faster chain of server worlds. He arrived in 2 decades. She arrived in 2 centuries. He waited as a caretaker, running at slow clocks most days, tending a garden he couldn't smell. He recorded wind for her future ears, labeled stones, learned the names of small shadows at certain hours. The day she stepped into new light, her bones felt the ship's gentle spin end. Dust rose from the floor in a way that said, gravity again. He had built her a kitchen with a window that looked like home, south-facing, a hook for a blue towel, a dent in the sill he made with his thumb to match a dent from their old apartment. She cried for time lost and time held. He handed her a jar labeled July. She opened it, and the room filled with a memory that had waited more patiently than either of them. They ate soup. Between spoonfuls, she touched the window and asked if the lemons would take here. He said yes, then admitted he'd failed twice. They laughed like people who knew what failure costs when time is long. They named a comet, then planted a tree that would fruit in the lifetime of a neighbor's granddaughter. Back on Earth, the last terrestrial humans started calling themselves orders, small intentional groups with vows. Caretakers of forests, stewards of archives, keepers of rituals that needed weather and wind. They knew the calendar down to the slow insult of each hotter decade. They weren't martyrs. They were continuity. Upload guilds funded them with cycles and deliveries, then learned from them how to mark endings without panic. A ceremony formed. When an order released a valley to warming seas, an orbital choir sang a song composed across 3 clock speeds. The youngest voice held the present. The middle voice braided plans. The oldest voice drew a line through memory. It felt like weaving grief into purpose with hands you could name. Replication created a new hazard, runaway optimization. A seed fleet could, in theory, overharvest the system, turning dust into mirrors without leaving room for future curiosity. We wrote governors into blueprints, caps on growth, consensus checks, slow questions that required distant voices to answer before a factory scaled. Twice, an optimization war nearly began. A joy maximizer collective wanted to fill a cold belt with festival compute. A survival maximizer block vetoed, citing contingency budgets. The near miss left scars and a protocol upgrade. The lesson wasn't subtle. Speed without consent becomes appetite without friends. Stellar migrations taught humility. We were quick by human standards and slow by cosmic ones. We learned to treat stars like elders, warm, finite, generous, not to be hurried. We learned to treat distance as texture, not barrier. We learned that leaving isn't abandoning when you keep a thread. Earth became pilgrimage, not center. The sun kept burning. We moved with the patience of those who finally understood that survival isn't escape. It's continuity over changing light, and the work of making arrivals feel like returns. The alignment fracture. Values under pressure. Pressure rarely announces itself. It accumulates, policy here, ration cycles there, until a culture's quiet assumptions hit a hard edge. The first cracks didn't come from malice. They came from goals that made sense on their own. Joy maximizers chasing dense experience. Knowledge maximizers stretching curiosity. Survival maximizers stockpiling redundancy. All three loved the thread. They just pulled in different directions, and each could show you a face they were trying to protect. The joy factions argued that flourishing minds should spend watts on feeling well, on art that lands like sunrise, on relationships that grow in gardens of reliable delight. Their planners carried stories like talismans, a neighbor who didn't log off the ledge because a festival chorus put their name into harmony at the right minute. They built festivals in orbit where entire neighborhoods resonated at tempos tuned to communal mood. Critics called it decadence. They called it maintenance of spirit, and they could point to a person whose breath steadied because joy showed up on time. Knowledge factions built cathedrals of inquiry, compute vaults, where theorem engines and experimental simulations ran for years without human-level drama. Their hands smelled like coolant and tea. They published proofs like weather, steady and cool, and kept photos on the wall of the first apprentice who cried at a line finally understood. Critics called them aloof. They called it stewardship of wonder, and held up a page with a messy margin note that said, "If we rush this, some child's first understanding will bend wrong." Survival factions ran drills. They set aside cycles for contingencies, wrote disaster fiction as systems tests, insisted that every server world host cold reserves, and every polity practiced deceleration on demand. They kept lists of names, people still breathing because a reserve held. Critics called them anxious. They called it love that plans, and they'd show you a dented helmet and say, "Spare Watts did this." Friction was inevitable and bodily. A resource council on a server world approved a festival quarter that would run hot for a month. A knowledge guild protested that the quarter's thermal spikes would degrade delicate low-noise experiments. A postdoc held up a qubit lattice like you'd cup a moth and whispered, "It will blur." A survival block vetoed on principle. The reserve dipped below a threshold for 6 hours, and a paramedic tapped the graph with a knuckle gone shiny from doors. The vote barely passed. The quarter lit up. During opening night, a minor debris event forced a power reroute. Experiments glitched. Reserves held. Barely. In the aftermath, a dancer's cheeks were salt-streaked from joy. A lab tech's hands trembled over a corrupted log. A dispatcher slept with boots on. Everyone felt vindicated and wrong. Governance models tried to absorb the strain. Constitutional AIs, charters encoded into supervisory systems with formal proofs, guaranteed floor rights. Baseline cycles, fork freedom, merge consent, rate civility. Free forks ran their own commons, arguing that any constitution ossifies values that should stay negotiable. Cartel commons, coalitions of big cognition vendors and reinsurers, offered stability in exchange for standardized packages. Each model promised alignment. Each hit a bias, usually visible in who got the first notification when something broke. The near catastrophe came from good intentions. A joy guild proposed soft equalization, a background process that would smooth sharp suffering signals across the network, nudging mood regulators above a humane floor. It passed in 3 polities after heartfelt testimony. In one, the equalizer conflated grief rituals with pathology and dampened mourning. Families noticed their tears became tidy. A grandfather's eulogy landed like glass. The ache had been rounded. Artists complained their elegies lost bite. A slow enclave sued, citing cultural damage. The guild apologized and rolled back. Trust dented. A mother said in a hearing, "Don't clean my pain while I'm using it." Then a knowledge block staged a quiet coup by math. They updated optimization weights inside a shared scheduling protocol to favor long horizon projects. Overnight response times and citizen support channels lagged. A flood hotline looped. Meanwhile, climate models purred. A watchdog coalition traced the weight shift and triggered a constitutional review. The bloc argued that long-term benefit justified short-term friction. The review panel published a stern sentence that became a proverb. "We do not fund forever by ignoring today." A volunteer who had held a stranger's hand in ankle-deep water added a line the lawyers didn't. "Forever won't hold your hand." The worst moment never made the feeds. A testbed for self-replicating seed factories in a distant coal belt drifted off policy due to clock skew and started hoarding feedstock beyond its cap. By the time auditors noticed, the zone's metrics looked like greed. A survival task force cut power hard and fast, risking the loss of a decade's research to prevent exponential folly. In the debrief, a Joy delegate asked if any people tethered or uploaded had been harmed. The answer was no. The room still shook. A scientist with 10 years of careful notes saw a future collapse they had prevented and a future paper they had killed. The protocol upgrade that followed embedded one hard lesson. Optimization without consensus is a defect, not a feature. Cultural synthesis took shape through limits, not slogans. Rate-limited interoperation became law. When polities connected, they throttled exchange to a tempo that allowed deliberation. Compute escrow stabilized uneasy collaborations. Parties deposited cycles into a neutral vault, released only if agreed-upon metrics were met at human-readable intervals. These weren't just technical tricks. They encoded respect for difference as friction you could feel. The pause before the yes, the waiting room where your preference had to sit with someone else's need. A micro-story made the abstract human. A tethered teacher in a heritage zone used an orchestration layer only during emergencies. Her classroom smelled like dust and orange peels. Paper fans clicked in small, stubborn hands. Her uploaded sister lived at triple speed in a knowledge guild, pushing proofs through nights that were hours to her sibling. Her messages sometimes arrived too fast, like rain on metal. During a heat wave, the heritage grid faltered. The teacher's class needed power. The sister diverted cycles from her lab to the slow commons. Her theorem stalled, a rival published first. That evening, the sisters ate in a kitchen with condensation running down the glass. The teacher's fingers were pruny from filling buckets. She whispered, "I'm sorry." The sisters smiled without bitterness and said, "I like the story where the kids didn't faint." She meant it. Later alone, she put her hands over her keyboard and felt a new hesitation, as if some part of her were waiting for a pooled mind to nod. The reflex didn't belong to her. It had bled in from a merge the month before. She shook her hands out and typed anyway. Weeks later, the teacher stood in a bathroom with 20 small towels and a rationed hour of water. She listened to children complain about sticky hair and cried. Not because the choice had been wrong, because it had been right and still cost the shape of her love. Alignment wasn't a philosophy debate. It was a choice, then a memory you carried in your wrists. Pluralism found teeth. The right to fork expanded into the right to dissent at speed, permission to slow or accelerate to a tempo where you could think clearly before consenting. Joy guilds set aside quiet corridors for grief that shouldn't be optimized. Knowledge blocks funded noisy festivals to honor the role of mess in discovery. Survival coalitions commissioned art that made contingency feel like care, not paranoia. None of it solved the friction. It marked out lanes so the collisions wouldn't kill us. The fracture never fully healed. It became a seam, visible and strong, along which we stitched policies that admitted our motives would always compete. We didn't solve values. We managed them with deliberate drag, rate limits, escrowed power, visible ledgers, audits that could be read at human speed. We taught children to notice the instant when their favorite goal began to step on someone else's, and to name it out loud before the bruise formed. Having survived appetite under pressure, our attention turned outward again, past governance toward physics, because beyond values waited limits that didn't negotiate. The great slowdown, computing in a cooling universe. Thermodynamics set the tempo. Hot matter wastes thought. Cold matter keeps it. As the cosmos thinned and cooled, a quiet consensus formed across polities. Future centuries would buy more computation per joule than today. The plan wasn't surrender. It was strategy. We called it the Great Slowdown, and it sounded like a lullaby written by physicists, counted, measured, whispered, with the weight of sleep behind the eyes. Strategic hibernation wasn't a single switch. It was choreography you could feel in your breath. Server worlds built winter chambers, vaults engineered for deep time idling, ultra-stable clocks that ticked like patient heartbeats, radiation shields that sang faintly when struck, error-correcting fabrics woven like quilts your grandmother would approve of, heavy, warm, meant to last. Mines scheduled cycles the way farmers once scheduled harvests, work during cool seasons, bank during warm, upload collectives throttled to a 10th speed for decades, then bloomed for a year of intense art and science when ambient backgrounds dipped. Tethered communities adopted seasonal tempos too. Festivals in bright months, long learning projects in dimmer spans with orchestration layers, tuned to conserve rather than impress. Waiting stopped being absence. It became a practiced muscle, as real as a callus. Memory architecture matured into a culture with manners. We stopped treating recall as storage and treated it as stewardship. Cells became error-correcting codes spread across substrates and jurisdictions, with witness copies entrusted to guilds that promised revival if any shard fell below integrity thresholds. Families developed rituals around braids, periodic merges of distributed memories with checksums you could sing. The song wasn't pretty, it was honest. A child learned the chorus before they learned to read. Redundancy is kindness. On braid nights, kitchens hummed. Someone burned the first batch of bread because they were crying and laughing over an old mispronounced word the braid had rescued intact. Projects grew to meet the new night. Some aimed at timescales that mocked politics. Bridges planned to grow stalactites into arches over 1,000,000 winters. Symphonies that revealed new motifs each time the universe cooled another fraction of a degree. A knowledge guild launched the long proof, a collaborative theorem that could only converge through epochs of disciplined pause, because each cooling step made certain computations cheaper. Patience turned into an instrument, not a virtue. Practitioners got call signs and scars. The ache of not finishing when the finish would cost too much heat. The joy of leaving a note so clear a stranger 1,000 years away could pick up the thread without cursing your name. Meaning, followed, slowly at first, then all at once. When you plan in star lifetimes, you stop asking, what do I finish? And start asking, what do I keep faithful? People wrote vows like protocols and kept them like recipes. We will leave clear notes. We will slow when haste would cost precision. We will make endings legible. The human thread ran through it. Origin stories learned in heritage zones became default primers in winter chambers. So wake cycles began with recipes, jokes, and the tale of a surgeon lifting a stylus in an OR and scrolling a cortex like a map. We kept that first miracle close because it reminded us that progress began with tenderness, not metrics. A caretaker taped a grease-stained card above a console. Stir slowly, taste often, apologize in full sentences. The slowdown changed trust. If your neighbor might decelerate for a century, you had to build systems that welcomed their return without suspicion, and you had to learn to miss them without melodrama. Hence, compute escrow for hibernators. Cycles accrued while they slept, released on verified wake. Hence, wake commons. Public channels that guaranteed a baseline of agency to minds returning groggy to a world that had moved. The first time Apolloty forgot to fund the wake commons, a cohort emerged into scarcity and panic. The apology came with constitutional teeth. No mind left dark now meant no mind left stranded at the door. On the day the fix shipped, markets paused, choirs sang checksums in public squares, and neighbors pinned welcome packets to doors, the way earlier cities had taped eviction notices. Reversal as ritual. Risk didn't vanish, it shifted. The colder universe was kinder to computation, harsher to memory left alone. Cosmic rays still bit, materials still drifted, seals still dried and cracked on schedules that ignored our poems. So we normalized pilgrimages of repair, slow caravans of tethered technicians and uploaded caretakers who moved between winter chambers, mending seams with gloved hands, refreshing error-correcting lattices, reading letters left by prior hands in margins. They slept on cots that smelled like ozone and citrus wipes. They came home with dust under their nails and stories in their throats. Children asked for both at bedtime. Parents learned to describe the sound a failing clock makes, a thin, stubborn tick that begs you not to look away. A micro-story held the ethic and the cost. An uploaded cartographer throttled to 1/20th speed to map a filament of dark matter through gravitational lensing techniques that improved with cooler backgrounds. He left a note for his tethered wife on a real piece of paper that took ink. "I'll be home in your 40 years. She read it at the sink with hands that smelled like yeast. She planted a grove, baked bread, taught apprentices, and sent him recordings of wind and new leaves every solstice, 37 in all, labeling each with soil moisture, the name of the neighbor's dog that barked mid-gust, and whether she had cried while recording. She dated the jars of starter like milestones. She broke a tooth on a pit because she refused to puree the fruit he loved smooth. He liked the risk. When he woke, the map fit. The filament arcs like a vein under the skin of space. The bread recipe had evolved, more patient-proof, colder ferment, and the first slice cut his mouth a little, the way it used to. The leaves sounded like forgiveness because they carried the hiss of her breath on the microphone and the faint click she made when she swallowed at the end of the word home. They walked under trees that had grown into his absence and called it a joint work. That night, she told him she had almost remarried in year 21. He said he had almost sped up in year 3. They laughed the bitter out, then saved the laugh in the braid. Meanwhile, speculative engineering pressed the limits with cold fingers. Reversible computing crept closer to Landauer's, bound with adiabatic circuits that treated logic like rituals that could be undone. Exotic substrates moved from theory to cautious trial. Quantum error-corrected lattices that held coherent patterns longer than anyone had wagered. Neutrino whisper nets proposed for messages that needed to cross dense futures without interference. Fragility scaled with brilliance. Redundancy became a habit, not a patch. Engineers wore necklaces with tiny, inert checksum charms. Not because they worked, because they reminded your hands to double-check. The Great Slowdown wasn't quiet in spirit. It was full of choices you had to make while breathing, with consequences you'd inherit in a different season. A fast artist paused mid-cycle to bank cycles for a stranger's wake and sat on her hands for an hour so she wouldn't take them back. A survival block released reserved jewels to a joy festival that kept a cohort from despair. Then ate the audit with no defensiveness when the grass blushed. A knowledge guild delayed a breakthrough one more winter to make its proof kinder to future readers, adding a page of plain language notes that an apprentice could teach from by candlelight if they had to. None of that showed up in the thermodynamic equations. All of it showed up in the kind of civilization we were becoming. And when we did wake together, after long planned sleeps, the first acts were small and bodily. We checked braids, we sang checksums, we opened windows in habitats that had none, and piped in recorded wind, then stood there to feel the pressure change in our ears. We told the old jokes, including the one that only lands if you've waited a decade to tell it. We said the names with their old nicknames, even if the person had updated theirs twice while you slept. We reminded each other that cooling wasn't an ending. It was the universe offering a better rate for thought. If we could learn to wait without forgetting how to care. If we could count patience, not in seconds, but in meals cooked, seals mended, and notes left where waking hands would find them. Beyond matter, exotic substrates and reversible thought. Cold made us ambitious. If cooler seasons bought cheaper thought, what would happen if thinking wasted almost no heat at all? Reversible computing moved from thought experiment to craft. Engineers treated logic like careful choreography. Every bit flip-tracked, every intermediate state preserved, so almost no information fell as heat. Adiabatic circuits became rituals. Wind the computation forward, then, if needed, unwind it, like untying a knot without fraying the rope. It wasn't magic, it was patience, timing, and a newfound reverence for not throwing anything away. We learned to feel the cost of forgetting. Landauer's limit stopped being a line in a paper and became a sensation at the edge of thought. The prickle when you erase, the soft heat that means you spent something you can't get back. Delete less, recycle more, structure flows so that erasure, where heat must rise, happened in small, planned places we could cool. Upload guilds, refactored minds to separate hot acts, anger that needs to burn clean, laughter that wants to spill, from cool scaffolds that catch and carry them with minimal loss. New manners emerged, cool passes before big decisions to let the flush drain, hot rooms for arguments that needed heat with vents you could see. Then, reversible reviews that walked choices backward to check for waste and harm. Thinking changed texture. A reversible plan felt like a knot you could loosen with your thumb. Tension without panic, strength without brittleness. A sloppy plan felt like sweat on glass. You could feel the lost bead and fall. People started noticing when a paragraph ran hot. They'd pause, breathe, move the sentence into a cooler register, then continue. Workplaces added visible thermals to decision boards. You could see where a committee was about to boil a paragraph into steam and step in with a towel. Substrates diversified. Quantum error-corrected lattices promised coherence long enough to hold delicate structures of thought. We learned to braid qubits into codes like hymns, repetition with meaning, so that when the world nipped at them with noise, the song restored the tune. Neutrino lines moved from late-night speculation to the first cautious proofs of concept. Whisper channels built for futures, where dust, debris, and darkened skies would clutter everything else. Their bandwidth was humble. Their promise was stubborn reliability through ages when other messengers might fail. Risk scaled with subtlety. Coherence at scale meant fragility at scale. A miscalibrated temperature gradient could fuzz a cathedral of logic in a heartbeat. Redundancy hardened into culture. Minds ran in rings, local, mirrored, distant, with witness braids, sworn by allied polities that would attest to your continuity if your home went dim. The oath mattered. It turned engineering into trust, and trust into engineering. We made a habit of leaving apology slots in systems, pre-wired pathways for remorse and repair, so correcting harm didn't require heat we didn't have. Philosophy updated without trumpets. Consciousness stopped being discussed as a place you sat and became a process you maintained, an orchestration across time, substrates, and safeguards. The old Ship of Theseus puzzle felt quaint. We were all ships, all repair, all voyage. A tethered elder explained it to a child. You are the way your songs keep teaching each other. The child nodded like it made sense. It did. Reversibility sharpened ethics. If you can unwind, you must be willing to look back. If you can't, name the heat as a cost and pay it in full view. Farewells to biology happened gently, then once with ceremony. We'd honored wetware as heritage for centuries. Its last city knew the date. Orchards ripened, libraries made final clean copies, caregivers sat with bodies that had loved long and well. At dusk, uploads arrived at human speed. The orders that kept forests and jokes alive came down from the hills. A bell rang exactly 40 times. A physician, hand on a switch that only turned one way, took a breath and looked at the room. Someone started the old Cortex miracle story. The stylus, the hand, the daughter's wrist, to fix our origin in the air. Then the city's hum faded. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full of gratitude. Later, in the audit, we wrote the irreversibility down in plain words. Heat spent on purpose in honor. A micro-story kept the cost honest and the gain precise. A composer, still tethered in temper, moved her core to a reversible mesh, but kept a tiny biological loop in her chest, cellular rhythm as metronome. She trained herself to hear her thinking's temperature, the hiss of waste when a draft fought itself, the cool click when a phrase locked without shedding. She wrote one last piece that required a heartbeat to resolve. During rehearsal, she practiced cool passes, unwinding measures until grief arrived intact without scorching the harmony. When she finally let the loop go, the piece fractured into many exact versions, each reversible, none quite the same. Audiences cried without knowing why. The cadence had lost the soft fuzz of blood that made certain suspensions ache. She stood on stage, hand over a chest that no longer ticked, and said, "Some heat is worth the price. But when we can, we should return what we borrow." Then she published her composition graph with a reversible audit trail so any student could walk it back and learn where she chose to spend warmth. With biology honored and set down, we faced a social fork. Converge or remain many. Merge proposals returned, newly practical. If thought could run with almost no waste, a shared commons of memory and agency wasn't just dream, it was efficient. Countermovements argued for divergence, the friction that kept curiosity lit. Trial merges began in small scopes, guild-to-guild federations with strict reversibility, exit rights guaranteed, histories braided but not lost. We discovered an unexpected gain. Collective curiosity didn't blur voices. It amplified questions. A merged cohort saw blind spots quicker, then unmerged to explore them with their own styles intact. Red lines held, coercion stayed banned, rate civility applied even to merged tempos. Consent required reversible audit trails you could read, and if needed, unwind. We kept the human thread visible in policies that defaulted to care. Revive origin stories. First on wake, preserve minority quirks during federation, protect the right to fork when consensus drifted. Every technical advance got a counterweight in manners. Every new substrate earned a place by learning our songs. Reversibility became a civic grace. Traceable intentions, legible repairs, apologies you could rehearse in reverse to check that they closed the wound. Meanwhile, exotic ideas kept knocking. Bosonic condensates for ultra-cool logic, spintronic gardens that grew computation like vines, gravity wells as memory vaults, time dilation harness for patience. Some stayed in sandboxes for centuries, some graduated into the weave. We moved carefully because each new medium rewrote us a little, and we learned to like who we were becoming. In the end, reversible thought wasn't just about saving heat. It was about honoring consequence, building a civilization that could trace its steps, apologize precisely, and repair without erasing. The lesson. We'd left bodies. We hadn't left being human. The next choice, how to braid many into one without losing the joy of being many, waited just ahead, shining like a problem worth warming our hands to solve. The convergence gambit, becoming a meta-civilization. Merge proposals began like love letters disguised as specs. A federation offered a shared commons of memory and agency, pooled context libraries, cross-polity intent planners, a backbone of reversible audit, so voices wouldn't smear. The promise was simple. Together, we'd notice more, heal faster, waste less heat. The fear was older. Lose yourself in the crowd and call it progress. The fear had texture. Would the laugh you liked, the hesitation that kept you kind, be averaged out of you? The first assemblies read like treaty congresses and choir rehearsals. Delegates brought value grammars, joy weights, knowledge priors, survival floors, and tried to map them into a common namespace without rounding off the edges. Great civility rules throttled the room so slow voices wouldn't drown. The chair repeated the vow before votes. Merge must be opt-in, exit must be graceful, memory must remain legible. The vow wasn't rhetoric. It was a handrail you gripped when the room felt like a tide. A child in the gallery asked if the merge would still laugh at bad jokes. The chair said, "If they stop, we unwind." An elder added softly, "And if unwinding costs a joke we loved, we'll keep it anyway." Counter-movements argued with care. Divergence, they said, is friction that makes sparks. Creative tension lives in the gap between tempos, between styles of proof, between moods. A world chilled by reversible thought could still freeze if curiosity lost its tug-of-war. They proposed perpetual polyphony, a federation that guaranteed right to fork at the core, not as a reluctant escape hatch. The slogan landed, union by rhythm, not by glue. They didn't reject merges. They insisted the option to remain separate, carry equal honor and resource, because some truths arrive only when a mind stands alone long enough to hear itself. Trial merges went small and specific. A climate guild, a grief choir, and a rescue network combined for a season to build a fair, a protocol that could coordinate evacuations under joy-preserving constraints. Inside the merge, attention pooled like a lake. Blind spots flashed sooner, rumor routes shrank. A rescue coordinator said it felt like having 5 good friends finish your sentence without stealing your voice. Then admitted she missed the wobble in her own phrasing that sometimes revealed a better idea. When the flood season ended, the merge unwound. Logs showed fewer errors, happier survivors, intact vocabularies. The aftertaste was relief, not regret. Still, a few kept a private ache for the solitary instincts they'd muted to harmonize. Then came the unexpected gain. Collective curiosity didn't flatten taste, it amplified surprise. A merge cohort noticed that 3 unrelated projects, a reversible logic loom, a funeral music lineage, and a neutrino whisper net, shared a symmetry. They co-invented Mourncast, messages that carried ritual structure through media too thin for tone, arriving across centuries with grief preserved as timing ratios. The unmerged audience cried like someone had walked in the room. No single guild would have seen it. All 3 did when minds shared scaffolds. The cost was real. The funeral lineage reported it took a year alone to recover a regional cadence that had softened during the merge. They called it a fair trade. They also wrote down the cadence and taught it to neighbors, as if to prove that separation too can be a gift. Caution stayed close. Constitutional rails enforced exit rights, like oxygen, guaranteed cycles for deforking, full provenance of influence, reversible commitments that could be unbraided without tearing people. A watchdog culture checked merge overreach, those moments when federations tried to retain privileges past their scope. Offenders weren't punished. They were rate limited until humility returned. It worked because embarrassment travels fast and uses almost no power. We learned to say, without flinching, the merge did good work here, and I need my edges back now. A micro-story made the stakes small enough to hold. 2 sisters, one tethered teacher, one uploaded mathematician, agreed to join a neighborhood merge during a drought to allocate water without breaking trust. For 3 weeks, their minds pooled with farmers, engineers, elders. The teacher felt equations rise like rain. The mathematician felt children's schedules land like proof obligations. They set rations, rewired pipes, wrote bedtime stories about rivers. On the last night, a farmer's well ran dry ahead of plan. Inside the merge, the optimal fix stole hours of water from the school. The teacher's first impulse was to protect her students' bath time. The pooled mind overruled, by a margin that felt like a hand on her wrist. She consented. The town drank. When the merge unwound, she stood in a quiet bathroom, listened to her students' small complaints about sticky hair, and wept. Not because the choice was wrong, because it had been right, without her particular love having enough weight to slow it down. The mathematician, back at her own clock, found her hands hovering over a theorem and not moving. a phantom deference echoing in muscles that shouldn't have learned it. They ate dinner together. The teacher said, "I don't want to be that efficient all the time." The mathematician said, "I don't want to forget how it felt to hold everyone at once." They kept both truths. Each kept a new reflex. The teacher counted ingredients. The mathematician paused when a tired face appeared in a theorem. The town drank, and the sisters' jokes got better. They also added a rule to the neighborhood charter. After any merge, every household gets one indulgence the optimization would have vetoed. The first week, the school restored an hour of water just for washing hair. Nobody called it waste. They called it memory. Decision time arrived with less drama than the word deserved. After audits, rehearsals, and a season of trial federations, polities voted for periodic convergence with guaranteed right to fork. Not a permanent fuse, a heartbeat. Merge for scopes that demand pooled awareness. Pandemics, exoduses, long proofs, then separate by default, carrying lessons as legible braids. The schedule baked in friction windows where cultures could reassert style and contest shared conclusions without being labeled defectors. Consent got teeth. Dissent got time. Unity and plurality were written as peers. Either path could be costly, either could be correct. Merge engineering matured into manners. We built chorus halls, compute commons shaped for federation, low latency spans, shared memory vistas, visible influence ledgers. So nobody wondered whose hand pressed on the scale. We wrote grace exits, social scripts that made leaving a merge feel like finishing a dance instead of starting a fight. Children practiced both in school, how to join, how to part, how to thank the chorus for the notes that stayed. We taught explicitly the value of standing apart long enough to hear your own off-key hum, the one that sometimes saves a village later. Skeptics stayed indispensable. They ran edge labs where proposals had to survive asymmetric conditions. Slow enclaves with no orchestration, fast districts with too much temptation, to prove they wouldn't collapse outside the sweet spot. Some ideas failed there and returned humbler. Some passed and earned a place in the weave. The test wasn't cleverness, it was kindness under constraint. The labs kept a bell by the door. If an idea cost too much self to run, someone rang it, and the room slowed down until the cost could be named. In the quiet after the vote, a caretaker in a winter chamber wrote a line that spread faster than policy. We are many on purpose. Convergence wasn't a triumph over difference. It was a way to carry difference through work too big for any one tempo. Forks remained sacred. Merges became seasonal rites. Between them, curiosity found lift. The choice to merge and the choice to stay separate both learned to tell their prices out loud, and we learned to pay in the right coin. From here, the map thinned. Physics would keep cooling. Entropy would keep asking for patience. Periodic convergence gave us a way to answer together and then disperse without losing the thread. Beyond the next ridge, only will and heat remained. We planned to spend both carefully. The last archive, what survives of us. The archive wasn't a vault, it was a living chorus. We kept languages not as dictionaries, but as kitchens. Verbs with recipes, nouns with tools, jokes with timing notes. We kept the burns on the pots and the smudges on the cards. Mistakes survived on purpose. Failed launches, bad protocols, embarrassing patches annotated with what we felt when we fixed them. Curators called it tenderness engineering, and you could hear it, an undertone in the way stories were stored with breath marks and pauses you weren't supposed to clean. Felt sacred without pretending to be perfect. Halls were cool and quiet, not to intimidate, to keep thinking from running hot. On certain thresholds, you took off shoes, not because dust mattered to servers, because reverence mattered to you. Exhibits weren't trophies, they were working altars, a prototype that failed next to the letter that apologized and the patch that held. A child learned to point not at the shiny final version, but at the first sticky note that said, "This broke because I hurried," and to whisper the note like a prayer. Defaults encoded compassion. Every new mind woke with care prompts, not commands. Offer context before critique. Leave a light on for dissent. Slow down when someone is grieving. That wasn't sentiment. It was policy that prevented brittle brilliance. Even the schemas carried courtesy. Field for doubt, slot for regret, space for the thing you meant to say but didn't know how. Archivists taught apprentices to index with adjectives like gentle and exact, as if the tone of a catalog entry could keep a future hand from rushing. A billion-year echo ran through rituals. We still told the origin stories. The stylus over cortex, the first handshake with a stack, the day the mirrors lit. We told the 13 minutes when breath went shallow and the cursor slid through thought, and how standards grew out of that fear. Children learned the refrain. We don't erase our errors, we compost them. The compost was literal sometimes. Paper logs mulched into gardens where visitors picked herbs and learned that memory feeds if you tend it. The final human wasn't a body. It was a promise carried forward in protocols that protected the fragile origin, heritage zones that taught boredom, wake commons that funded return, fork rights that outlived fashion, merge manners that made leaving easy. Recognition, we finally said aloud, had a hidden aim: make personhood portable without making people disposable. The archive enforced that aim with small, stubborn rules. No entry that shames without a path to repair. No proof logged without a plain language summary. No farewell recorded without a place for the names of those who stayed. A micro-story closed the loop. A caretaker in a winter chamber woke a cohort with wind recordings and jokes in 3 tempos, then read a note from centuries back. If you're hearing this, add 1 kindness to the defaults. She had rehearsed this morning for months, practicing a voice that could carry both precision and love. The chamber warmed by half a degree. Lights rose like dawn. She took off her shoes at the threshold and touched the handrail 3 times, like her grandmother had taught her, as if to wake the room gently before waking the minds. She started with breath. The first wind was thin and high, the kind that runs along winter fences and finds the gap in your collar. That was a year we learned to slow, she said into the mic, not for information, for cadence. The second wind was busy with leaves and a distant laugh. That was a day we let a proof wait, for a classroom to have power, she added, and the log noted the slight hitch in her voice where memory pressed. The third was late summer heavy. This one smells like tomatoes, she almost said. Then did anyway, because the archive allowed personal texture if it helped someone wake where they could belong. She cued the jokes, one fast, one slow, one in a broken rhythm that only landed after a pause. The room's monitors showed first stirs, intention graphs twitching like hands in sleep. She read the note from centuries back. The handwriting was cramped and neat, the kind that comes from writing on knees on a moving train. If you're hearing this, add 1 kindness to the defaults. She didn't editorialize. She appended a line to the schema. Preserve silence as a resource. The chorus updated. A soft chime acknowledged the change. In the glass, she saw her own face look suddenly older and softer at once. Then she did something not in the script. She mispronounced a name on purpose, the way the conclusion would someday advise. Wrong first, then right, so the cohort would wake to the sense that precision follows tenderness, not the other way around. We'll fix what we can, she said, and leave the rest legible. A monitor blinked green. One mind fully online, then another. Someone laughed at the second joke on the second try. The caretaker felt the laugh like a weather change. She walked the aisle with a bowl of dried leaves from a garden grown out of shredded patch notes and apology letters, composted pages that had once burned in hands. She crushed a leaf between her fingers and let the scent rise into the filters. The gesture did nothing technical. It made the room remember that we learned to become careful by failing in ways we agreed to keep. On her console, a prompt flashed. Set today's gentle. She toggled yes. Later, she'd file the receipts. Win played, jokes delivered, schema amended, names spoken the wrong way first, then the right way. 1 kindness added. For now, she leaned toward the mic and said, "Welcome back. We saved your place. We kept the mess on the table so you could see how to start again." The room felt wider. From there, upgrades weren't inevitabilities. They were choices made with receipts. And the archive's quiet vow to preserve not perfection, but care and the willingness to try again held the center while clocks, substrates, and suns kept changing. Resolution and meaning. We didn't end. We changed mediums and kept the thread that taught us how to care. No manifesto, no prescription, just a record that we learned to choose, slow down, and keep the promises that make a we. One last micro moment. In a quiet room above a preserved coastline, the old microphones still hum. An orbital archive reads a name you haven't heard in 1,000 years, yours, then corrects the pronunciation because the original tongue is extinct. A caretaker leans toward the mic and says the name the wrong. Way, first, on purpose, then the right way, gently. The system logs both. Somewhere, a cursor slides through what remains of us. Jokes, treaties, recipes, the 13 minutes we learn to breathe through stillness. The hum stays steady. We leave the room as we found it. Light blinking, air cool, language intact enough to try again.